What if the anxiety you feel today is not actually about today? What if the tension living in your shoulders right now, the tightness sitting in your chest, the restlessness you cannot explain and cannot seem to shake, are not weaknesses, are not character flaws, are not signs that something is permanently and fundamentally wrong with you? What if your body is simply remembering something your mind has tried very hard to forget? Pause for a moment and really sit with that question, because it changes everything. Think about the last time you felt a sudden wave of unease for no obvious reason. The last time your heart raced in a situation that was not actually dangerous. The last time a smell, a sound, a tone of voice, or even a particular quality of light triggered something inside you that you could not explain and could not control. The last time your body reacted before your mind had even registered what was happening. Most of us dismiss these experiences. We label them anxiety. We call them stress. We tell ourselves we are overreacting. We feel embarrassed by the intensity of responses that seem disproportionate to whatever triggered them. We wonder why we cannot simply calm down, move on, think rationally, and behave the way we believe we should. But what if those reactions are not irrational at all? What if they are your body doing exactly what it was designed to do, protecting you from a threat it genuinely believes is still present? A threat that may have ended years ago, or even decades ago, but that your nervous system never received permission to release. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetry. This is neuroscience. And one of the world's most respected trauma psychiatrists spent over 30 years of his career proving it with brain scans, clinical research, and the deeply personal stories of thousands of patients whose bodies were speaking a language the medical world had not yet been learned to hear. His name is Bessel van der Kolk. He is a psychiatrist, researcher, and founder of the Trauma Research Foundation. And the book he wrote after 3 decades of working with trauma survivors changed everything we thought we knew about psychological pain, the human body, and the extraordinary possibility of healing. That book is called The Body Keeps the Score, and today, on Psychology Explorer, we are going to explore it together, deeply, carefully, and in a way that connects every idea directly to your life, your body, and your experience of being human. Before we dive into the lessons themselves, it is worth understanding why this particular book matters so profoundly, and why it has resonated with millions of readers around the world since it was published. For most of recorded human history, we treated the mind and the body as separate systems. Psychology dealt with thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Medicine dealt with the physical body, and the two rarely spoke to each other in any meaningful way. When it came to psychological pain, to the aftermath of traumatic experiences, the dominant assumption for a very long time was that healing happened primarily through the mind, through talking, through gaining insight into what had happened, through understanding the experience intellectually, and gradually coming to terms with it, through language and rational reflection. And for many experiences, that approach genuinely helps. But Bessel van der Kolk kept encountering patients for whom it was profoundly insufficient. Veterans who could describe their combat experiences in precise detail, but whose bodies continued to respond as though they were still on the battlefield. Survivors of childhood abuse who had spent years in therapy developing sophisticated, intellectual understanding of what had happened to them, but who still could not sleep, still could not feel safe in relationships, still could not inhabit their own bodies with any sense of peace or ease. Something was being missed, something fundamental, and van der Kolk dedicated his career to finding out what it was. What he discovered, through decades of clinical work, neuroimaging research, and collaboration with scientists across multiple disciplines, was something that shook the foundations of psychiatry and opened an entirely new understanding of what trauma actually, where it actually lives, and what it actually takes to heal from it. Trauma does not just live in your memories. It lives in your body. It rewires your brain. It reshapes your nervous system. It changes the way your heart beats, and the way you breathe, and the way you respond to the world around you, long after the original experience has ended. This book matters because millions of people around the world are living with the physical consequences of psychological experiences they may not even fully remember. They are being treated for symptoms: anxiety, depression, chronic pain, autoimmune conditions, relationship difficulties, concentration problems, emotional dysregulation, without anyone ever addressing the root cause, living silently inside their biology. This book gave those millions of people a language for their experience. It told them they were not crazy, they were not weak, they were not fundamentally broken. Their bodies were responding in entirely predictable, understandable, biological ways to experiences that had overwhelmed their capacity to cope. That validation alone has been genuinely life-changing for countless people, and the science behind it is even more extraordinary. By the end of this video, you are going to understand how trauma physically lives inside the human body. You are going to understand why the brain stores overwhelming experiences in ways that bypass language and rational memory. You are going to understand why traditional approaches to trauma often fail to reach the place where healing actually needs to happen. You are going to understand what genuine recovery looks like according to decades of rigorous scientific research. And you are going to walk away with practical, grounded, immediately applicable ideas for beginning to understand and work with your own nervous system in a more compassionate and informed way. This is one of the most important books ever written about the human condition. Let us explore it together. Key lessons. Lesson 1. Trauma is not what happened to you. It is what happened inside you. The first, and perhaps most fundamentally important idea in this entire book, is also the one that most directly challenges everything most of us were taught to believe about trauma. When most people hear the word trauma, they think of catastrophic events, wars, violent crimes, terrible accidents, natural disasters, the kinds of experiences that are universally recognized as devastating and that obviously warrant a serious psychological response. But Bessel van der Kolk discovered something far more nuanced, far more compassionate, and far more accurate than this simple equation of trauma with catastrophe. Trauma is not defined by the event itself. Trauma is defined by what happens inside your nervous system in response to that event. This distinction is everything because it means that two people can go through the exact same experience and walk away with entirely different outcomes. Not because one is stronger or weaker, braver or more fragile, but because of differences in their nervous systems, their histories, their available support, and the specific circumstances surrounding the experience. When something happens that your nervous system cannot process and integrate, something that overwhelms your capacity to cope, that makes you feel completely powerless, completely unsafe, completely without any sense of control over what is happening to you, your brain and body go into emergency survival mode. Every available resource gets redirected toward immediate survival, and sometimes, when the experience is overwhelming enough, the nervous system gets locked in that emergency state and never fully comes back out. Van der Kolk describes this as the essence of traumatic stress, not the memory of something terrible, but the ongoing activation of survival responses in the present, triggered by reminders of something that happened in the past. This single insight has enormous and immediate implications for how we understand ourselves and others. It means we should stop asking why someone cannot simply get over something that happened a long time ago, and start asking what is happening in their nervous system right now that is keeping them locked in a response that belongs to the past. Trauma is not weakness. Trauma is a biological response to an experience of overwhelming helplessness, and understanding that changes absolutely everything about how we approach healing. Lesson 2. Your brain has 3 layers, and trauma affects all of them in different ways. To understand how trauma lives in the body and the brain, Van der Kolk walks us through the structure of the human brain in a way that is remarkably accessible and immediately illuminating. Think of your brain as having 3 distinct layers that evolved at very different points in human evolutionary history. Each layer has its own functions, its own priorities, and its own relationship to the experience of trauma. The deepest and most ancient layer is what scientists sometimes call the reptilian brain. This is your survival brain. It controls all the fundamental biological functions that keep you alive. Your heartbeat, your breathing, your body temperature, your basic metabolic processes. Most importantly for our purposes, it is the home of your most primitive and powerful survival responses. Fight, flight, freeze. These responses operate entirely below the level of conscious awareness. They happen to you before you have any opportunity to think about them, and they are extraordinarily powerful, precisely because they evolved in environments where the difference between surviving and not surviving depended on the speed of your response. Wrapped around this reptilian core is your mammalian brain, the limbic system. This is your emotional brain. It is the part of your brain that processes feelings, generates emotional responses, manages your sense of attachment and connection to other people, evaluates situations for safety or danger, and stores emotionally significant memories. This is the part of your brain most directly involved in the experience of trauma, because it is here that the alarm signals are generated, and here that traumatic memories get stored in their fragmented, body-based form. And sitting at the very top, most recently evolved and most distinctly human, is your rational brain, the prefrontal cortex. This is where language lives, where logical thinking lives, where your conscious sense of self lives, where your capacity for planning, reflection, imagination, empathy, and deliberate decision-making lives. This is the part of your brain you rely on when you are trying to understand your experiences, make sense of your feelings, and navigate your relationships thoughtfully and intentionally. Now here is what trauma does to this beautifully complex three-part system. When you encounter a situation that your brain registers as threatening, particularly one that feels overwhelming or inescapable, your reptilian survival brain and your limbic, emotional brain take immediate and complete control of your entire system. Your rational brain essentially goes offline, not metaphorically but literally. Blood flow actually shifts away from the prefrontal cortex and toward the survival centers of the brain. Your capacity for rational thinking, language, nuance, and conscious reflection becomes severely diminished, precisely when you might feel you need it most. And the memory of that overwhelming experience gets stored not as a clear, coherent, language-based narrative that you can consciously recall and reflect on. It gets stored as fragmented physical sensations, raw emotions, disconnected images, sounds, smells, and body memories, without any clear timeline, without any organizing narrative, without the rational brain's capacity for context and meaning-making. This is why trauma memories feel so different from ordinary memories. Ordinary memories feel like something that happened in the past. Trauma memories feel like something happening right now, because they were never processed and stored with the contextual information that would allow the brain to recognize them as belonging to the past. And this is why simply talking about traumatic experiences is often insufficient for healing. You cannot fully access with language and rational reflection what was never fully stored in language and rational thought. The healing has to go somewhere deeper, somewhere in the body, somewhere below the words. Lesson 3. Your body keeps the score in ways that are deeply literal. The central discovery of this entire book, the one that gave it its remarkable title, is something that Kolk arrived at through a combination of clinical observation and neuroimaging research, and it is genuinely extraordinary in its implications. Kolk and his colleagues conducted brain imaging studies in which trauma survivors were exposed to reminders of their traumatic experiences, sometimes through recorded narratives of what had happened to them, sometimes through sensory cues associated with the trauma. And what the brain scans revealed was remarkable. When trauma survivors were exposed to these reminders, the same survival circuits that had been activated during the original traumatic experience lit up again with the same intensity, as if the trauma was happening again right now, in the present moment. The body could not distinguish between the memory and the present reality, between a reminder of the past and an actual threat in the present. Simultaneously, and equally significantly, the areas of the brain responsible for language and rational processing went dark. The part of the brain that would allow a person to say to themselves, "This is a memory, this happened in the past," "I am safe right now," became largely inactive precisely when it was most needed. This explains so much that can otherwise seem baffling or irrational about the experience of trauma. The sudden racing heart when you hear a particular sound, the wave of nausea when you encounter a particular smell, the instant paralysis when someone uses a particular tone of voice, the complete emotional shutdown when a situation feels even remotely similar to something that once overwhelmed you. Your body is not malfunctioning in these moments. Your body is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is trying to protect you from a threat it genuinely believes is still present. Kolk also discovered something equally important about the long-term relationship between trauma survivors and their own bodies. Over time, many trauma survivors begin to lose contact with their own physical sensations. They stop being able to accurately sense what they are feeling in their bodies. This disconnection is itself a survival strategy. When feeling your body becomes associated with overwhelming pain, terror, or helplessness, not feeling it becomes a form of protection. But this disconnection comes at an enormous cost, because your body's internal signals are fundamental to how you understand your own emotions, how you navigate your relationships, how you make decisions, and how you experience the simple reality of being alive in the present moment. When you lose contact with your own body, you lose contact with yourself. Lesson 4. Trauma rewires your brain's alarm system. Deep within your emotional brain, your limbic system, sits a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Kolk describes this as your brain's smoke detector. Its job is to continuously scan your environment, your body, and your sensory experience for any signals that might indicate danger, and to trigger an immediate alarm response when it detects a threat. This system is extraordinarily valuable. In genuinely dangerous situations, it can save your life. It operates faster than conscious thought, which is exactly what you need when facing an immediate physical threat. By the time your rational brain has finished processing what is happening, your amygdala has already launched your survival response. But here is what happens in people who have experienced significant trauma. The smoke detector becomes hypersensitive. It becomes calibrated to an environment of chronic danger, the environment in which the trauma occurred, and it begins detecting smoke where there is no fire. It begins triggering full alarm responses to situations that share some sensory or contextual similarity with the original traumatic experience, even when those situations are completely safe. A tone of voice that resembles the voice of someone who once caused harm. A smell associated with a dangerous environment. A quality of light, similar to the light present during a traumatic event. A feeling of physical restriction that reminds the body of helplessness. These kinds of triggers can launch a full biological alarm response in a trauma survivor. Racing heart, shallow breathing, muscle tension, tunnel vision, flooding emotions. That is completely bewildering and terrifying to experience, especially when there is no obvious external threat. Kolk calls this being stuck in the chronic activation of survival responses. The nervous system never fully returns to a baseline state of calm, grounded safety after trauma. It remains in a state of low-level emergency, constantly scanning, constantly vigilant, constantly poised to respond to a threat that may never come. And the consequences of this chronic activation ripple through every area of life. When your survival system is chronically activated, your rational brain remains partially offline. Decision-making becomes difficult. Emotional regulation becomes exhausting. Maintaining close relationships becomes challenging. Simple, ordinary situations can trigger responses that feel wildly disproportionate, because your nervous system is responding not just to what is happening now, but to the ghost of what happened then. This is not a character flaw. This is not weakness. This is a nervous system doing its job extraordinarily well in the wrong context, and not knowing how to stop because it never received the all-clear signal it needed. Lesson 5. Trauma destroys your sense of living in the present. One of the most devastating and least discussed consequences of unresolved trauma is something Kolk describes as the collapse of the present moment. And it is something that trauma survivors often struggle to articulate, precisely because it is so total and so pervasive that it becomes the only reality they know. Trauma survivors typically exist somewhere between two extreme and equally exhausting states. Either they are flooded, overwhelmed by intrusive memories, flashbacks, physical sensations, and emotional storms that belong to the past but feel completely and urgently present, or they are completely numb, shut down, disconnected, moving through the motions of their life without really inhabiting it, feeling as though they are watching themselves from the outside, unable to feel pleasure or connection or genuine engagement with anything around them. Very rarely do they experience what most of us might take for granted, the simple, grounded, embodied sense of being safely and fully present in the current moment, of feeling your feet on the ground, of tasting your food, of genuinely hearing what someone is saying to you, of feeling your own emotions as informative signals rather than overwhelming threats. This collapse of the present happens because the traumatic memory was never processed in a way that allowed it to be filed away as something that happened in the past. It remains raw and immediate and vivid, as activating and as real feeling as the day it, say, occurred. The brain never received the neurological signal that says this event is over. It belongs to the past. You can file it away and move forward. Kolk describes this using language that is both scientifically precise and deeply human. He says trauma survivors are neurologically haunted, not in any metaphorical or supernatural sense, but in the very real sense that the past is not behind them. It is continuously and involuntarily present in their nervous systems, their bodies, their reflexes, their emotional responses, and their perceptions of the present world. And this involuntary presence of the past makes it extraordinarily difficult to build a life in the present, to form relationships based on who people are now rather than who they remind you of from before, to feel safe in situations that are objectively safe, to inhabit your own life with any sense of agency, meaning, or genuine engagement. Lesson 6. The nervous system needs to feel safe before it can begin to heal. Perhaps the most hopeful, most human, and most practically important discovery in this entire book is about what actually creates the conditions for healing from trauma. And it is something both simpler and more profound than most people expect. Kolk found consistently, across decades of clinical work and research, that the single most important ingredient in trauma recovery is the experience of felt safety, not cognitive safety, not being told you are safe, not intellectually understanding that a situation is not dangerous, but actually feeling safe, in your body, in your nervous system, in your muscles and your breath and your heartbeat, in the presence of another human being. This distinction between knowing you are safe and feeling safe in your body is absolutely crucial. Because trauma lives below the level of rational thought, it cannot be healed only by rational thought. The nervous system needs to have a direct, embodied experience of safety to actually feel the physical reality of being safe before it can begin to relax the vigilance it has been maintaining. And Kolk found that this felt sense of safety most powerfully emerges in the context of attuned human connection. When we are in the presence of another person who is genuinely present with us, who sees us clearly without judgment, who responds to our emotional state with warmth and attunement, something happens in our nervous system that cannot be replicated by any amount of individual insight or intellectual understanding. Our nervous systems are fundamentally social organs. They were designed, through millions of years of evolution, to regulate themselves in relationship with other nervous systems. When we feel genuinely seen, heard, and safe with another person, our alarm system quiets, our survival responses begin to settle, our rational brain comes back online, our bodies begin, slowly and tentatively, to release some of the tension they have been holding. This is why isolation is so profoundly destructive for trauma survivors, not just emotionally painful, but biologically harmful, because it removes the primary mechanism through which the nervous system knows how to regulate itself. And it is why genuine human connection, not advice, not problem-solving, not analysis, not judgment, but true, present, attuned, embodied connection, is one of the most powerful healing forces available to any human being. Lesson 7. The body must be directly involved in any genuine healing process. The final, and in many ways most practically revolutionary lesson of this book, is Kolk's argument, supported by extensive clinical evidence, that traditional talk therapy alone is insufficient for healing trauma, and that any genuine healing process must directly involve the body. The logic here flows directly from everything else we have explored today. If trauma is stored below the level of language, in the body and nervous system, in fragmented sensory memories and locked survival responses, then approaches that operate primarily at the level of language and rational thought cannot fully reach the place where healing needs to happen. You can talk about what happened, you can understand it intellectually, you can develop insight into how it has affected you. All of that has genuine value, but it cannot, by itself, complete the survival responses that got locked in place. It cannot send the signal to your nervous system that the threat has ended. It cannot help your body discharge the energy that has been held in its muscles and tissues and organs since the moment of the original, overwhelming experience. What Kolk found, through research into a remarkable range of approaches, is that healing happens most powerfully when the body is directly engaged in the process. He found compelling evidence for the therapeutic power of yoga, specifically trauma-sensitive yoga, in helping survivors reconnect with their bodies in a gradual, safe, and non-threatening way, learning to notice and tolerate physical sensations without being overwhelmed by them. He found evidence for the power of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, a technique that uses bilateral stimulation of the brain to help process and integrate traumatic memories in a way that pure talking cannot achieve. He found evidence for somatic experiencing, an approach that works directly with the body's held survival responses, gently completing them so the nervous system can finally discharge the energy of the original threat and return to a regulated baseline. He also found, perhaps most surprisingly, extraordinary therapeutic power in theater and performance, in the experience of inhabiting different states, voices, and perspectives within a safe creative context. Because trauma freezes people in a single fixed response, theater can help thaw that freeze by expanding the range of experiences and expressions available to the nervous system. The common thread running through all of these approaches is that they work directly with the body and the nervous system, rather than trying to bypass them. They create the conditions for the body to do what it has always known how to do: regulate, integrate, and heal, when given the right environment of safety, support, and direct physical engagement. The body that kept the score must also be given the opportunity to write a new one. Everything we have explored today is rich and complex and scientifically grounded, but the question that matters most right now is what you do with it. How do these ideas touch your life in a practical, concrete, immediately useful way? The first thing, and perhaps the most important, is to extend genuine compassion to yourself. If you recognized your own experience in anything described today, please understand at the deepest level you can access that your responses are not character flaws. They are not signs of weakness, fragility, or fundamental brokenness. They are biological adaptations, your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, in response to experiences that overwhelmed its capacity to cope. You are not broken. You are responding, and that is entirely different. The second thing is to begin cultivating awareness of your body's signals. This does not mean analyzing every sensation or turning your attention inward in a way that feels threatening or overwhelming. It means beginning to gently notice, without judgment, the physical sensations that arise in your body throughout the day. The tension that arrives in your shoulders when a particular person calls, the heaviness that settles in your chest in certain environments, the way your breathing changes when you encounter specific situations. These sensations are your body's language. They are information, and learning to receive them with curiosity rather than dismissal or fear is the beginning of a different relationship with yourself. The third thing is to actively and intentionally prioritize felt safety in your daily life. Think carefully and honestly about the people in your life whose presence makes your body feel genuinely calm and at ease. Not just your mind, but your physical body. Think about the environments, the activities, the rhythms, and the rituals that produce that same quality of physical ease and settledness, and begin to prioritize those things not as luxuries, but as biological necessities. Your nervous system heals in safety. Creating more safety in your life is not self-indulgence. It is medicine. The fourth thing is to move your body with intention and gentleness. Van der Kolk's research returned again and again to the healing power of physical movement. Yoga, walking, swimming, dancing, martial arts, not primarily as fitness activities, but as nervous system regulation tools. Movement helps the body discharge held stress responses and return to a more regulated, settled baseline. If you begin a movement practice with this understanding, that you are moving not just to exercise, but to regulate, to discharge, to reconnect, it becomes something qualitatively different and potentially transformative. The fifth thing is to invest in genuine human connection. This means not just being around people, but allowing yourself to be genuinely seen by people who feel safe, allowing attunement, allowing the experience of being truly heard and understood without judgment. This is not always easy, particularly for those whose early experiences taught them that closeness was dangerous. But it is one of the most powerful healing forces available to any human nervous system. And the sixth thing, and this is important, is that if you recognize significant trauma responses in your own experience, please consider seeking support from a qualified, trauma-informed therapist or mental health professional. The ideas we explore on Psychology Explorer are educational. They can open doors. They can provide frameworks and language and understanding. But real healing, particularly from significant trauma, happens in relationship, in the body, over time, with skilled and compassionate professional support. You do not have to carry what your body has been holding alone, and you do not have to figure out how to put it down by yourself either. Bessel van der Kolk spent over 30 years sitting with people whose bodies were speaking a probit, a language the world had not yet learned to hear, people who had been told their reactions were irrational, people who had been prescribed medications to suppress their symptoms without anyone ever asking what those symptoms were trying to communicate, people who had spent years trying to think and talk their way out of something that lived far below the level of thought and language. And he listened, he researched, he scanned their brains, he worked with them in therapy, he tried every approach he could find that might help them not just manage their symptoms but genuinely heal. And then he wrote a book that gave millions of people around the world a language for their own experience, and with it, a map toward something they had perhaps stopped believing was possible. Healing, not the elimination of memory, not the erasure of what happened, but the transformation of the relationship between your nervous system and your past. The moment when a memory that once felt like a present emergency becomes something that actually belongs to the past. The moment when your body finally receives the signal it has been waiting for, that the threat is over, that you survived, that you are safe now, that you can breathe. That is what this book is ultimately about, not trauma, healing, and the remarkable, scientifically grounded, humanly accessible path that leads from one to the other. The most important thing van der Kolk leaves us with is this: your body is not your enemy. It never was. It was always trying to protect you, using every biological tool that millions of years of evolution placed at its disposal. The path forward is not to fight your body, silence it, override it, or be ashamed of it. The path forward is to understand it, to listen to it with curiosity and compassion, to create the conditions of safety and connection and embodied awareness that allow it to, finally, gradually, gently let go. That is what Psychology Explorer exists to help you understand. One book, one idea, one exploration at a time. If this video opened something in you today, a question, a recognition, a new way of understanding yourself or someone you love, then please subscribe, because every single week we go deeper into another book, another window, another layer of the most fascinating, most important, most intimate subject on earth, your own mind, your own body, your own extraordinary, complicated, resilient, healing human self. Thank you for exploring with me today. This has been Psychology Explorer. Take care of yourselves, be gentle with your bodies, and I will see you in the next exploration. Disclaimer: all content on Psychology Explorer is strictly for educational and informational purposes and represents our own independent analysis and commentary on published works. No original copyrighted text is reproduced. Psychology Explorer is not affiliated with or endorsed by any author, publisher, or rights holder, and all book titles and trademarks remain the property of their respective owners. Nothing in this video constitutes professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice. If you are experiencing trauma or mental health difficulties, please seek support from a qualified professional in your area. Subscribe to Psychology Explorer, new video every week. Decode your hidden mind.